The time is 3 a.m. in the middle of the night in central Stockholm, and the temperature has just fallen to minus 12 degrees Celsius. Ambassadorial residences in the cobblestone streets of Gamla Stan are tipped with glistening black ice, displaying the amber light of the medieval street lamps reflecting on them. The wind coming off the Baltic Sea is weighty, the cold that almost strangled, a cold that dulls the senses. Strikingly beautiful, tall, blonde, and what almost seems like a jarring ease, walking through this frozen minefield and cutting through the darkness. They travel with haste as though in search of something one doesn't expect to get late, dressed in huge wool jackets, with their cheeks reddened by the cold. This is what the world has sold you. This is picture the world has sold you. It was always a question asked here. Are women here beautiful? What is this beauty standing next to? This is Sweden, a long, thin stretch of land, 1,572 kilometers long in the northernmost part of Europe. Sweden can be divided into a temperate southern section and a severe Arctic tundra to the north. There are 10.5 million people spread over an area of 450,295 kilometers, leaving the country with a low population density of 25 persons per kilometer. You are being treated to cavernous and soundless spaces unless it's in one of the three great cities, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. The forest cover consists mostly of spruce and pine and covers almost 70% of the land. There are 100,000 lakes. Isolation isn't a concern, it's a fact of life in this large, sparsely populated land, the almost non-existent part now. Go to any coffee shop in Uppsala and observe a Swedish girl group. You will see something very counterintuitive. Even as they have every possible genetic edge over us in physical terms, high cheekbones, piercing eyes, lofty height, they emphatically deny even giving the slightest consideration to it. This isn't false modesty, this is Jantelagen. It translates as the law of Jante and is an unwritten and powerful social code that states that the principle, don't think that you are better than anyone else, must always be followed. You do not brag, you do not boast. Don't behave as though your appearance, wealth, or IQ mean something. When everyone is radically the same, failure is no sin. Even more pronounced success is not. This results in a peculiar psychological conflict in a pretty Swedish lass. But she understands that she is international interest and there is no way she can monetize that by her cultural programming. She will remain understated in appearance, wear understated and functional clothes, and play down compliments with an almost uncomfortable nod. Hold on to that. We will get there, except contemplate the day-to-day. Being economical in dealing with discomforts is one thing that you can learn from living in Sweden. The diet mirrors the land. It's pragmatic, consequential, and about preserving. Knell of Knäckebröd, a kind of crisp bread that can be as hard as a roof shingle, paired with butter and aged cheese. They eat fermented herring, pickled vegetables, and larger meatballs, prepared with elk and pork meat and served at exactly 10 a.m. and 3:00 p.m. in a ritual known as fika, and drink black coffee. Fika is more than just a coffee break, it's a secular sacrament. It's the sole instance when the famous Swedish stoicism cracks and brief moment of human connection is enshrined in the rules. Climate dictates all. During 6 months of the year, the sun rises scarcely above the horizon in the south, and it never rises in the north, above the Arctic Circle. The darkness is a solid object. Its effects are to steal away the color from the streets for days and weeks, to slate the sky for good, to drive the seasonal depression rates to some of the highest in the world. Cars, bicycles, and motorcyclists ride with their engines turned off. The trains in the public transit system, the SL, are like a miracle of punctuality. Not only do they arrive minute on the minute, but people stand on platforms 2 meters apart, staring at their mobile phones without eye contact. Military precision. Animals are rarely observed in the cities, but threat of the wild is always present. 2-meter tall, weighing more than half a ton, moose lumber onto suburban roads in an almost predictable terror and smash cars like biological tanks. The state of family structure is permanently changed. The traditional family unit, as a nuclear family, has been transformed into a state-sponsored program of independence with 480 days of paid parental leave available to both parents. Yes, this is the section title promised. The word Sweden is synonymous with the word for women in the world. It is the tall, blonde, blue-eyed standard that has been used since the 1950s as a global one. However, there is one thing that is more representative of an entire nation than any beauty pageant. It turns out that all this is genetically determined based over centuries of geographic isolation, with a bottleneck of Nordic genes combined with a diet remarkably rich in vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids, due in large part to the amount of fish consumed. In height, the average Swedish woman has the height of 165 centrifuges, which is more than 5 feet 5 inches, that make them one of of the tallest women in the world. However, to end their description at their physical appearance would be to grossly overlook the essence of modern Sweden. The beauty scene is contradictory. The women are gorgeous, but there's a fine punishment for showing off. Heavy makeup, fancy hairstyles, even high-fashion posing are not something you'll find too often as in Paris, London, or Moscow. Lagom means just right, not too much, not too little. That's a Hackly-eyed do, perfectly tousled, wearing the makeup to highlight, and an addiction to ethically produced, outrageously expensive, athletic leisure wear. The genuine course of action of the Swedish ladies isn't how they look, however, it's how they live. But Sweden is undoubtedly the most feminist country in the world. The idea of male providering is almost a forgotten thing. Swedish women are quite educated, incredibly independent, and they really do not need you. On the economic level, they are equal to boys. For socially, they don't anticipate a male caller pay for meal, pay attention to doors, or pull chairs. Otherwise, it's considered not chivalrous, but rather an insulting suggestion that they are weak. Dating culture is definitely entirely level. There isn't really a concept of dating as a multi-step courtship ritual, at least not the kind that is common in the United States. Part of the past decade of using Tinder in some weird place or another was a shaking turbulence and lingering anxiety over potentially coming off as trying too hard. However, this is the twist. The downside to this radical independence is that it can have a very dark side. It seems as though the proportion of one-person households, OH, is exploding in Sweden. Almost half of all adults are living alone. Women have attained an absolute level of parity in all the social and economic aspects, but many of them experience intense lonely feelings. The family's safety net has been removed, and the state's safety net is in its place. Without being married, you don't need to live with a husband. Without having children, you don't need to raise children in old age. The state gives it all. However, bureaucracy has taken the place of man and his texts, and something has been lost. Passion, romance, and messy intertwined family lives have been replaced by sterile, perfectionized autonomy of equal families. However, there is one thing that says much more about a country than any woman does. This is a place in stone of resilience. Sweden hasn't always been that easy on herself, that soft, that well-bred welfare state. It was one of Europe's most belligerent military force for centuries. Sweden went from being a winter-frosted backwater of Europe to being an imperial war machine in the early 1600s at the hands of King Gustavus Adolphus. In the 30 Years' War, the Swedes swept across the European continent, leaving devastation in their wake. They ruled over the Baltic Sea, they conquered Poland and made Denmark bow her knees. However, empires do come with a price, as the Swedish Empire was insolvent. On the death of Charles XII in 1718, the empire disintegrated. They were defeated in Finland by the Russians in 1809. This is the moment Sweden has forever changed. They realized that they no longer had their neighbors to conquer, and together they decided to cease hostilities. They stated that they were completely neutral. They transformed their martial grief, their imperial humiliation, into something new. They wed the discipline of the Viking Age and the organization genius of the military machine on the basis of peace, industry, and social engineering. The establishment of the Folkhemmet, the people's home, in the 1930s is no longer simply an economic policy, but a change in psychology. They created a society in which the state assumed the role of protector, of parent. They did bail it out with becoming the industrial powerhouse they did, though, with the likes of Volvo, Saab, Ericsson, and IKEA taking over the world without firing a single shot. That's where the daydreaming, leaving the armchair, and sitting in a spreadsheet begins. There's a price to pay for this utopia, not to mention the enormous cost. There is one of the highest tax loads on the planet in Sweden. If you purchase a cup of coffee for 45 SK, 25% of this price is VAT. If you purchase a pair of shoes, 25% will be deducted from the price of the shoes. Of 120 people who went to a restaurant, however, that's just the consumption tax. With a middle-class income in Sweden of 40,000 SEK immediately, about 32% of this is deducted as income tax before it is even in your bank account. If one is a high earner who earns more than 50,000 SEK per month, one is first moved to a higher category of income earners, and the loss in brackets will rise to closer to 40% or even 50% depending on the municipality. It's a Kafkaesque horror when it comes to rent in Stockholm. The availability of primary market is totally locked due to rent control laws. It takes the people 10 to 15 years to wait in line merely to obtain a first-hand contract for a standard one-bedroom apartment in city center. Unless you're prepared to wait 10 years, you have to enter the second-hand market, with landlords compliant to whatever fee they want. A tiny 50 square meter apartment in Södermalm can easily cost 18,000 to 25,000 SEK a month, roughly $1,500 to $2,500 USD. An average meal in a medium-sized priced restaurant will set you back around 200-300 SK per person. Excluding drinks, a beer at a bar is 80 to 100 SK, around $10. The monthly ticket for public transport in Stockholm is 930 SK. The cost of groceries for one person can be as high as 3,000-4,000 SEK per month. Nearly all fresh food is imported and subject to high taxes. That means, when looked at in comparison to the average gross income of a Swede before taxes, which is around 36,000 SEK, that calculations become very harsh. The lack of cost of the socialized healthcare, the free university, the greatly subsidized childcare, it's a matter of someone else's hours. The system in Sweden is beautiful as long as you have so much money that the taxes don't make much of a difference on you, or if you're so impoverished that the service becomes vital. Yet many in the huge, aspiring middle class are feeling the pinch. You are more taxed than comfortable, and that money is being used for a system you probably can't use to its fullest, but can't afford to avoid. If you've been a fan and made it this far and you liked it, a like and subscribe really helps. There is in fact the secret promised by the title. Surrounding the flawless IKEA showrooms, the smiley blonde girls, and progressive political rhetoric, there is a dark and violent crack in Swedish society. For decades, Sweden opened its doors to exceptionally high levels of immigration with a sincerely, but nonetheless naive humanitarian idealism. But the integration didn't work spectacularly. In the present case, Sweden tops the list of fatal shooting and gang violence in all Europe. A total of more than 90 bombings took place nationwide in 2022. Gang retaliations have included the use of hand grenades, a weapon of war, in suburbs of Stockholm and Malmö. The state has now developed into a situation of full loss of control in neighborhoods such as Rinkeby, Tensta and Husby, rock and fireworks thrown at police. In these areas, it takes an armed escort to get an emergency ambulance in and out. Mostly based in these shrunken, ghettoized neighborhoods, the gangs deal in narcotics, scare money out of people, and engage in a nasty literal turf battle. The danger is real. The rosy picture of Sweden being a utopian paradise, perfectly free from crime and perfectly equal, is a carefully nurtured illusion, which is broken as soon as one of the poor little Swedes glances at the crime figures. For more than 10 years, the political elite, paralyzed by a political correctness culture, kept its head down before the increase in violence nearly a decade ago was reported, with the warnings being considered as racist or xenophobic. Now the country is in a panic, enacting tougher anti-gang measures, giving police wide sweeping surveillance powers and attempting to deport foreign criminals. But the damage has been inflicted. Jantelagen's belief in the social cooperation of people, that everybody is equal and adjusts to the same rules, has been undermined irretrievably. That the violence should happen is a reminder that you can design a system to be perfectly fair in theory, but you can't make people into less tribal, much less resentful, and much less greedy. But it is outside the cities that it is necessary to comprehend Sweden. While the urban centers can be said to be the brain of any country, the nature can be its soul. Sweden's vast biodiversity is a frozen wonderland. 29 of them are national parks, ranging from its rocky and wave-dashed southern coasts to the alpine northern mountains. The geological process that makes up the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the High Coast, is literally rising out from the sea, as there is almost a centimeter of uplift each year, a rebound effect that remains from the immense pressure of the glaciers of the Ice Age that receded 10,000 years ago. Trees further north in the Ubsuk National Park open up the Sky section. This is one of the best places to see this incredible sight. The Northern Lights, also known as the Aurora Borealis. It is a river which wanders from paradise, a luminous green and purple film, over the absolute black of the Arctic winter. During the summer, it's just the other way round. It is the midnight sun that is the king of the hill. For weeks on end, the sun never sets. At midnight, it hugs the horizon and produces an exquisite golden, uninterrupted twilight over lakes and forests, which have a strange and surreal look. It is a place where you are taken face to face with smallness. The expanse of the Swedish woods, the quiet, the wolves, the brown bears there, deep in the country, makes you realize that, amidst the social engineering, the welfare state, the taxes, it is nature that rules out there. Where to put your feet first in this country if it's going to be dragging you in. Avoid visiting for the first time during the winter months. Visit late June, July. Start in Stockholm. Pass 3 days exploring the maze of Gamla Stan, the ferry ride over to the archipelago, 30,000 islands like green jewels on the brackish waters, and a gigantic shrimp bowl at a waterfront restaurant in Vaxholm. Afterward, head to the west to Gothenburg by high-speed train. It is the key to the Bohuslän coast, a rugged, craggy coastline with red-painted fishing hamlets that seem like they were cut off from the fairy tale. Fresh-eat lobster and oysters of the cold water. For the extreme, looking up there to Kiruna. Visit the world's largest iron ore mine that's underground. Afterwards, head to the village of Abisko, walk up the mountain Nuolja, and wait for the lights to arrive. Do not tip. Practical tips. The service charge is always included, and you should never try to tip it. It will only cause confusion and possibly slight offense to the service provider, as it means that their employer isn't paying them enough. Do respect personal space. If there is any room between the two, don't hang out next to anybody when waiting for a bus. When organizing, a spacing of 2 meters is kept. No matter what people say, don't gripe and complain about the weather. There is no such thing as complaining about the cold or the rain. It is a sign of weakness. Swedes know how to be stoic. Dress in layers. Buy good wool. Build a straight back. Get on with the job and take part in fika. This is the mirror then. After all, Sweden is not a country, it's an experiment. It is a huge, high-stakes laboratory, the working theory of which holds that human anguish can be eliminated by taxing, legislating, and squelching the ego. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at the girls of Sweden, you're not only taking a look at simply genetics. This is the end result of this experiment. Yes, they're pretty, but also cloistered and isolated, encumbered with the notion of complete independence. They have been born into a society that provides them with their means of living. They come up short in finding a way to live passionately. At 3:00 a.m., dressed in the right attire, with the right education, perfectly safe from the state, yet walking through a society that is slowly taking apart in the suburbs. Perhaps the question isn't if Sweden is the nirvana that the documentary suggests, whether you've spent any one day living the way they do, alone in the snow, perfect on your perfect shoulders, and denying your cold.